What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And as always, we have ourselves a jam-packed show as we have a lot to get into in the world of volleyball, such as Event 3 of the NBA. It did not disappoint as we had a lot going on in there as the Texas Tyrants clinching a share of its division. Now they'll go for the outright division title as they look really strong against their two opponents. And how about the Puerto Rico Pythons? Bite on, as I said over the weekend, as they took down the Chicago Untouchables for their first win of the season. And how about the Florida Southern Exposure? They looked good in a 5-set win over the New Jersey Freedom. Can they ride this momentum into Event 4 and possibly Event 5? And the US U21 team managed to win the Pan Am Cup gold medal as the ladies got it done as well as their U17 counterparts. I'll be talking about that. And Avery Drost stepped down from his head coach position at Mira Costa High School in terms of the boys volleyball team. I'll be weighing in on that and more on Set Point. So hand me a volleyball. Set for the next. So I'm about to serve you up some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday morning, Tuesday wherever you are listening from. Either way, you have made your way into episode 196 of Set Point. Without any further delay, let us begin. But first and foremost, Set Point would not be where it's at without IE Sports Radio providing the platform to go live on Spreaker. Please do follow IE Sports Radio on several different social media platforms, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok. We also have a Facebook for those that still use that social media platform. All you just gotta do is type in the word IE, then sports, then radio in the search bar. Just see our icon, just click it, like it, and then follow us. And then basically, that's how you're able to follow us. We also have a website, www.iesportsradio.com. And when you go there, you will see a Patreon link at the top. And if you choose to do so, donations will start at $5 a month if you want to donate. This will get you a shot from all of our amazing shows, and higher tiers include IE Sports Radio merchandise, access to IESRU, the podcasting university of IE Sports Radio, and even a chance to be featured on a segment of our flagship show, The Defining Moment with Larry B. Because for the past 9 years and counting, IE Sports Radio has been bringing you amazing content, ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, coaches, and other authorized media personnel, to building tailor-made shows dedicated to all major sports cities around the country. All the while, we've been continuing to be by the fans and for the fans, and with your help, we are ready to take the next biggest step. Thank you to everyone for all of your support and for making IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all that is sports. Shout out to our Patreon supporters, Bay Area Raised Apparel, Key to the Gate, Marcus Losgreat, and a donor that wishes to remain anonymous. With all that said and done, let us begin. So, the NBA happened this past weekend, as unlike previous weekends, this happened on a Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, just because I guess they wanted to do this on a Memorial Day weekend. Kind of didn't understand that, but it is what it is. I guess they thought that everyone was still going to be in town from Saturday all the way through Monday, so I guess it didn't make sense having it on a Friday where everyone was still working and in school and all that jazz. So the party or the event got started on Saturday. So this was event number 3. This basically marked the halfway point of the season in terms of events and in terms of the regular season. So we'll start off with the first matchup. This was the Chicago Untouchables taking on the Philadelphia Founders. This was quite an interesting matchup on paper, except not really. I kind of had a feeling that the Untouchables was going to win this one. No offense to the Founders, of course. The Founders have some good key players, but for the Untouchables, they're drastically improved. I know Larry B and I like to kind of make poke fun of the Untouchables in Adam Karnick's chat room, Chi-Town Weekly. But the Untouchables have really taken leaps and bounds to improve. But in this matchup against the Founders, they really did improve, and they swept the Founders 25-21, 25-18, and 25-22. The Untouchables were led by Andrew Kohut, who had 17 kills. He was kind of their main guy, as their next kill leader was Joshua Blair, who I think is a good candidate for, newcomer of the year. He had 8 kills to go along with 3 blocks. Kohut had a service ace and 4 blocks. Grant Molesky had 6 blocks to go along with 3 kills and 2 service aces. Daniel Venegas had 5 kills to go along with 2 aces. The Founders, obviously it's been a tough year for them with a young team. They're a new team. They were led by Jeff Nelson and Michael Lewis. They both had 8 kills. Colby Anderson had 5 kills. Chris Pasinski had 5 blocks, which was a positive. Peter Namiotko had 2 service aces and 2 blocks. So there were some positives for the Founders. And they didn't get trounced, but honestly, this was kind of expected just because the Untouchables they needed this win, and I basically said on Twitter they realistically could go 2-0, and they could be 500, which I'll be talking about that second matchup in a little bit. So the next matchup we had was the Inland Empire Matadors versus the Utah Stingers. Now this was quite the barn burner, and I even talked about this in my preview. For those that read my previews and my stories on the NVA website, I really do appreciate you. We got to get those pumping and promoted more. It just can't be just me promoting, but it is what it is. Cale Henderson pops into the chat room. He says, "Hey, Teran, have a great show." And Larry B obviously is in the chat room. He says he's up in here. I appreciate you being up in the chat room. And he says, almost to 200. Yes, I mentioned that on Twitter as well. All right, so Inland Empire Matadors versus Utah Stingers. So the Matadors won the first set 25-21. They were actually trailing for quite a bit in the first set before the media timeout, but then they started to get it together. Cesar Medina was obviously doing his thing, but he actually got some help with Antonio Anguizola. He had 5 kills to start in that first set. The Stingers, they didn't have a service ace, which was kind of interesting, but they outblocked the Matadors in that first set. But for the Stingers, they also did not have one of their key players as well, but that's no excuse. They had a bunch of their other key players in this event. So in the second set, the Stingers really got together. They really just turned the tide in that second set. I think that second set was kind of the little bit of a turning point for the Stingers. They knew they couldn't be down 0-2 to the Matadors as they took that second set 25-18. The Coburn brothers, Kevin and Sam, just really did their thing. They also got help from Mikhail Hoyt, who I thought did a really good job at the middle block position. I didn't even hear of this guy until this event. Ian Eschenberg was also a great help in the middle or at the right side as well. Now the third set was very entertaining. It was tight throughout most of the set. The Stingers led 24-21, but to the credit of the Matadors, they tied it up at 24 apiece, and they eventually won it off of a block as they won that third set 28-26. I was very impressed as Anguizola and Medina were just doing their thing. Orlando Jr. Rojas was also contributing in terms of the offense. We even got to see a couple of kills from Ricky Olea and Isaac Leva. And just like that, the Stingers were on upset alert. And I said that this would have been a big statement win for the Matadors if they were to pull it off. Now, the fourth set, Stingers were ahead, but the Matadors went up 20-18 after the media timeout. And eventually, the Matadors were up 24-21 after they registered a service ace. And it was suddenly match point, and it was looking like the Matadors were going to pull off the upset. But then the Stingers reeled off 3 straight points. They managed to tie it up 24 apiece, and they eventually won that fourth set 27-25, forcing a fifth set. Kevin Coburn was just a man on the mission. Ian Eschenberg was also a man on the mission as well. The Stingers' offense is so balanced offensively. There's not just one good player. There's just multiple great players. And in that fourth set, I gotta give it up to Russell Holmes. He brought in Patrick Paragas like midway through the fourth set. I'll say this about the Stingers. They had Reed Chilton as the setter, but he brought in Patrick Paragas, which I think was a key turning point because Patrick Paragas can really serve the ball tough. I covered Paragas back in high school, and he has that chemistry with the Coburn brothers just because the three played at high school, and they also won a national championship in high school. And while they didn't play together at college, they just have that team chemistry, and I really, really was impressed. And I think Patrick Paragas really paved the way for the Stingers. And that tough serving in that fourth set with the Stingers down 24-22 was a big risk versus reward factor. Obviously, you have the risk in terms of serving it into the net or serving long or wide, but then you have the reward factor where the tough serving could get the other team's offense out of system, and Holmes really did a great job of having that risk versus reward factor. And in set 5, Paragas was at the service line to start that fifth set, and he dealt 2 service aces, and his jump serving was just really strong and effective. It really got the Matadors out of system, and eventually the Stingers wound up running away with that set, winning it 15-5. So the Stingers were led by Kevin Coburn, who had 16 kills. Ian Eschenberg had 12 kills. Mikhail Hoyt, 10 kills. Sam Coburn, Kevin's older brother, had 8 kills. Eric Visgitis, that's Shane Holdaway. He had 7 kills to go along with 7 blocks. So Shane Holdaway actually made his NVA debut after he recently graduated from Long Beach State, and he made quite the debut. For the Matadors, they were led by Antonio Anguizola, who had 15 kills. Cesar Medina had 14 kills. Orlando, or as many call him, Junior Rojas, had 10 kills. Unfortunately, it was just not enough, as the Matadors just fell a little short of winning that match and posting a major statement win that could have probably propelled them and gotten them ever so close to clinching a playoff spot. So the next matchup we had on Saturday, was Florida Southern Exposure versus the San Diego Wild. This was another interesting matchup right here. I had thought of this as a sneaky good matchup. I just did not think it was good enough to be in my preview. So in the first set, Florida Southern Exposure, they had set point leading 24-23. Here's the thing about the Exposure. They are so underrated, and they've faced so much talent. Their problem is that they haven't really had a full roster. They haven't had middle blockers available because it's so tough to get everyone at these events. That's because they're coming from Orlando, Florida, over to Long Beach, California. But then the Wild closed out the set on a 3-0 run as they took the first set 26-24. This was the first event that the Wild had a good portion of their team. They had Matt Knigge, who was last year's NVA MVP of the playoffs, and they had Brandon Rattray, who was also part of the NVA's tournament team or playoff team, as Brandon Rattray just really started off strong. And he was playing internationally prior to coming back into the NVA. So the second set, it was also another tight set, but this time the Exposure closed out the set, and they won it 28-26. I want to say they won it off of a block. Either way, Zach Meyer and Evan McDonough was stepping up, but Sam Jackman is the main story of the Florida Southern Exposure. San Diego Wild obviously was led by Brandon Rattray and Matt Knigge. They tried to get a few other players involved, like Uchenna Ofoa and Lior Schiffer, but it was just the Brandon Rattray show. This was Brandon Rattray's show, and everyone knew it. Now, the third set was also another tight set, but it eventually went to the Wild, winning it 25-23. It looked as if that the Exposure was going to probably win it, but again, the Wild are just too stacked. They are just way too stacked. Rattray had 5 kills that set, and this was just his show, and he was just serving tough. He was serving a little bit tough to the point where he was missing quite a number of serves, but you can't fault him. You have to serve tough and aggressive. Then in the fourth set, it looked like it was going to be a one-sided set as the Wild were just running wild in that set. However, credit to the exposure, they really held their own and they made sure they did not get blown out in that set. But it just wasn't enough as Colby Elder, the setter, he won a joust at the net. And eventually the Wild took that third set they took the fourth set 25-23, and they took the match, which was big time right there. It was actually a second kill of the match, as he also had a service ace as well. But I did also hear that Colby Elder is going to be hanging up the volleyball shoes. I don't know why, and I can't confirm if this is true, but I do hear that he has another career he's pursuing. I think it might be in firefighting, but I'm not entirely certain of it. So in terms of the match, Brandon Rattray led the San Diego Wild with 25 kills. Matt Knigge had 10 kills. Rattray nearly had half of the Wild's kills, which is mind-blowing. And Matt Knigge, he had himself a solid game in terms of a season opener. He had 10 kills, 4 blocks, which I thought was impressive. Uchenna Ofoa, 6 kills, 4 blocks. Lior Schiffer, 5 kills. The Exposure were led by Sam Jackman, who had 16 kills. Exposure had 4 players in double digits, which is pretty good. Zach Meyer had 13 kills, Tyler Hubbard-Neal, 12 kills, Evan McDonough, 11 kills. It just wasn't enough as they were outblocked 12-7, and despite the missed serves from the Wild, Exposure had 1 less missed serve, so they just can't afford to have unforced errors against a team like the Wild. And then the last matchup we had was Las Vegas Ramblers against the Puerto Rico Pythons, or Kale's team. Long story short with this matchup, the Ramblers pretty much struck gold, and for the Pythons, they just could not keep up with the high-powered offense that was the Ramblers, as the Ramblers swept the Pythons 25-18, 25-17, and 25-20. The Ramblers were led by Colton Cowell, who had 12 kills. Yes, the Colton Cowell of University of Hawaii, the former University of Hawaii star. He also had 4 service aces, as he was making his NVA season debut, which is quite impressive. Felix Chapman added 9 kills and 4 service aces. If you remember in my post-game interview with Miguel Monterola, I think it was in Event 1, he said he also has another few surprises up his sleeve. And boy howdy, he had some good surprises up his sleeve. And this is probably one of them. And he also had Ryan Manoogian back in the fold as well at libero. And Ryan Manoogian was also playing international volleyball. Some of these guys that play in the NVA obviously play international volleyball. They just don't play in the NVA year-round, because if that's the case, then they're going to be super rusty coming back. Just because the NVA is only like part-time spring and then mainly in the summer. So they obviously have to stay in shape and whatnot. So as for the Pythons, they were led by Jair Santiago, who had 11 kills. Joseph Cuevas had 6 kills. Rafael Burgos Gunton had 3 blocks. And Cuevas had 3 service aces. It just wasn't enough to take down the Ramblers, as that was that for day number 1. Day number 2 featured the Utah Stingers taking on the Los Angeles Blaze. First set, the Stingers really stung the Blaze, even though fire is really effective against bugs, but I digress. As the Stingers took the first set 25-17, Storm Tafuga was kind of the headliner along with the Coburn brothers. Or I'm sorry, not the Coburn brothers, Shane Holdaway, as Kevin Coburn was also the headliner in that set. Then we got to see Sam Coburn play a little bit of setter, even though Patrick Paragas got the start at set. For the Blaze, they really showed some grit and resolve, as they actually were down 24-23, but they scored the last 3 points, and they eventually took that second set 26-24, which was darn right impressive. See, the thing about the Blaze is, they have a few injuries, and they just don't have their full team. If they can get their full team, they actually might have a chance to win at least one match. Charles Belvin is a fantastic player. Andrew Dubé also is really good. Daniel Matheny, obviously a good player. Dexter Campbell, he has some talent to him. And their setters are pretty good as well. And their libero, Trevor Briggs, he brings a lot of fire, being a former Long Beach State guy. So you obviously can't count out the Blaze. So the third set, I hate to say this, but the Stingers kind of rose back to the occasion. They basically laid down the sting on the Blaze as they won that third set 25-16. Then in the fourth set, it was more so of the same. It wasn't as ugly as the Blaze played for pride, and they made sure to make the score a little bit respectable. But the Stingers won that fourth set 25-20. Leading the Stingers in the win was Sam Coburn, who had 15 kills. So if you're keeping track, he had 0 kills in the first set, but then the next 3 sets, he averaged 5 kills, which is darn right impressive. But it wasn't actually just him leading the way. It was actually his older brother, Kevin, who led the way with 20 kills. He had 2 blocks. Storm Tafuga added 11 kills and 2 blocks. The only real drawback of the Stingers, or the only negative thing I could really say about the Stingers, is that they only had 2 service aces, but that's probably because they were just serving super aggressive. And probably doesn't show on the stat sheet, but it just shows that they're just serving tough. And while it doesn't translate into aces, it translates into eventual points. Shane Holdaway added 7 kills as his NVA debut was indeed a success. The Blaze were led by Charles Belvin, who had 14 kills. Andrew Dubé had 10 kills. Daniel Matheny chipped in 8 kills for the Blaze as they're still trying to find their first win of the season. They had one more match to do so against the Orange County Stunners, but we'll see. I'll be talking about that in a little bit later. So this next matchup was the Puerto Rico Pythons versus the Chicago Untouchables. Oh, this was probably the most emotional, gut-wrenching, and I felt so bad for one of the teams. So in the first set, and this was probably the longest match of the season, and it wasn't just because longest match in terms of minutes played, or because it wasn't because of that. So the first set, it was a very tight set. It was back and forth. It looked like the Pythons actually came to play, but then the Chicago Untouchables really started to string it together. But then it was 24-23, and then it went into like overtime. But it was this was the point of the big turning point of the match. It was 24-24, and I forget who scored. I think it might have been Jair Santiago. Could have been Joseph Cuevas. But at the net, this was probably the most gruesome thing that happened. If you were at this event or you saw on the live stream, this was probably the most unfortunate thing to happen for the Chicago Untouchables. Andrew Kohut went down with a dislocated right foot injury, and that was what swayed the momentum of this match. I hate to say this, and this is nothing against the Puerto Rico Pythons, but if the Untouchables do not lose Andrew Kohut, the Untouchables don't lose this match. I hate to say this, but spoiler alert, the Untouchables lost this match, and the Pythons won for their first victory of the season, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But losing Andrew Kohut was a big loss, and I have had this experience. I have kind of landed awkwardly on my foot playing basketball, and it's not a fun deal. Now, I don't think I've dislocated my right foot. At first, I thought this was an ankle injury or an ankle sprain, but this was more than that, and I had to look a little bit closer, and everyone was just looking at the injury, and everyone was getting my same vibes. I thought this was just a little bit of a sprain, but then his right foot was basically twisted to the right. It was pointing more right than ever, so it was dislocated, and he was pretty much in pain. The good news is that he was in good spirits, as his sense of humor was basically not injured, and he was basically just smiling, having fun, taking selfies. So the good thing is that he was in good spirits. The bad thing is that the guy's foot was basically pointing in a whole other direction. And it was eventually confirmed that it was a dislocated right foot. Nothing was broken, and that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario was that it was broken and he would have needed to have major surgery. But it's a dislocated right foot, and he's going to need to have season-ending surgery on it. So he is going to be out for the year. He was also going to need to have surgery on his one of his shoulders as well, according to Ira Thor, as he informed me of this. But that is a tough loss for Andrew Kohut. However, he is going to be back in the NBA next season, so he is going to make a speedy recovery, and I, as well as the entire IE Sports Radio family, want to send our well wishes to Andrew Kohut and his loved ones and friends, and the Chicago Untouchables for a speedy recovery, and we wish him nothing but the best going forward. So, you've got this, Andrew. But back to the first set. The Pythons took that first set 29-27. I give credit to the Untouchables. After witnessing their teammate going down like that, I'm surprised that they did not just... I don't mean to say this in a negative way, but I'm surprised they weren't mentally just drained after that. But they just did not give up, and eventually they just kept fighting. They fought for their brother. The second set, the Untouchables wound up winning that second set. I want to say it was off of a service ace from Tucker Ziegenhorn, as they won the second set 25-23. It was looking kind of promising. And I was thinking, if they win this match, this might be one of the most this could probably be an ESPY for best performance, or most impressive performance, as taking over for Andrew Kohut, because that's not an easy player to replace. As Joshua Blair had to fill the void even though he was playing middle. Tucker Ziegenhorn had to take his place. Ramon Matos was taking over the right side. Daniel Venegas had to step up at the left and right side. So for the Untouchables, they had to do a whole lot of flipping of their lineup. Then in set 3, this was kind of where it kind of got flipped upside down. The Pythons jumped out to an early lead. Jair Santiago was not wanting to lose, even though everything of what happened in terms of the Puerto Rico Python, or of the Untouchables. And eventually the Pythons took that third set 25-20, and they were one set away from winning the match. And it wasn't just Jair Santiago. He got some help, as most of the Pythons matches had been Jair Santiago playing Superman and carrying the team. But this time he had other players like Giovanni Linas helping him out, Rafael Burgos Gunton helping him out in terms of getting kills. Luis Carlos Ruiz did a great job at setter position. He was phenomenal. So the Chicago Untouchables were on their heels. Then in the fourth set, it was back and forth early on, but then the Pythons started to slither away. But to the credit of the Untouchables, they did not give up, as they were down by as many as like 8 or 9. They got down to as little as like 5, but it just was not enough, as the Pythons took that fourth set 25-19. Jair Santiago had himself a match to remember. He had 26 kills, 2 blocks, and a service ace. Giovanni Linas, 9 kills. Steven Morales, 7 kills. Rafael Burgos Gunton, 11 kills, 2 blocks, and 2 aces. The Untouchables were led by Joshua Blair and Ramon Matos, each having 10 kills. Tucker Ziegenhorn had 9 kills. But unfortunately, losing Andrew Kohut, one of their top players, to an injury just is mentally draining, and it just doesn't help that you lose a player of that Excalibur to an injury like that, just because he was their leading guy, and he was kind of their program changer. And this was that if Kohut doesn't sustain that injury, I think possibly they don't lose their mental focus, and who knows, maybe the Untouchables possibly win this match. They surpass their win total from last year. They're 500, and it's a whole new season for them. But now it's kind of interesting. But I'll be talking about the standings after I'm done with this recap. So then we had the match of the day in day 2 of event number 3. We had the New Jersey Freedom taking on the Texas Tyrants. Oh boy. So the first set. This was quite the doozy of a first set. I did not know how many set points it took for the Tyrants to try to win that first set, or the Freedom to try to win that first set. But eventually, the Freedom took the first set 37-35. I thought that set was never going to end. I thought it was going to be another 39-37 set from the Wild and from the Ramblers and the Wild. But for the Freedom, they took the first set. Then the second set, the Freedom took it by a much smaller score, 25-19. They eventually pulled away after the media timeout, and honestly, they were up 2-0 on the Tyrants, and I said this in my preview when it came to the Freedom and the Tyrants, or in terms of the Tyrants altogether. The Tyrants were good, but you had to consider their opponents prior to this event. They were a combined 2-14, which none of them had a record above 500. Now, obviously, that's cruel to basically dissect records and go into that just because certain situations and all that, but you have to consider teams being battle-tested and whatnot. And then you also had to consider the New Jersey Freedom coming off of a reverse sweep, and then you had to consider them playing the Stunners and being in their division, so you have to take all that into consideration. And I do pay attention to detail in terms of all of that stuff. So, in the third set, the Tyrants kind of woke up, or they kind of saw me tweeting that out. But either way, they took the third set 25-18. They didn't really have their full roster. That's the scary thing. They didn't have Gianluca Grosso and a few other guys, but they did have the two-headed monster in Ryan Mather and Jake Langlois. And they had a head coach in Mauro Grosso, Gianluca Grosso's father. So the Tyrants finally got on the board in terms of winning a set. Meanwhile, for the Freedom, Joe Norman was just doing his thing, as well as Chris Vaughn and Jared Ray. Then the fourth set, it was tight early on, but here was my thing that I kind of wonder. The Freedom used their timeouts very early, and this is no knock on Carlo Edra. He called timeout at 9-8, and then he called timeout when his team was down 12-9. Now, I'm no head coach, and I'm not here to judge, but I wonder why he called timeout so early in that set, because eventually his team was down, I want to say maybe 8 or so. Or I don't think they were down by as many as 8, maybe like 5. But his team was having to play catch-up throughout a good portion of that set. However, they got to within 1. I'll give the Freedom this. They got to within 1, but unfortunately, they just were not slowing down Ryan Mather or Jake Langlois. The big turning point of the match was set 3, by the way, as Mauro Grosso brought in Tanner Maxwell at setter, replacing Chris Hall. So I think that was a big turning point. You obviously like Chris Hall. Chris Hall is a great guy. He's a great setter. But Tanner Maxwell has been in the NVA longer than him. So I think you got to go with experience in the NVA versus a guy who's hasn't really seen the NBA a whole lot, even though Chris Hall has played internationally and whatnot. And this is no knock on Chris Hall. I think Chris Hall is a great setter. The problem is that he just hasn't had that much NBA experience. He only got to play, 2 sets and 1 match last event. I think it was just only 2 sets in event number 2. So, yeah. That left a lot to be desired for him. But then in set 5, it was it was tight early on. The Freedom led 4-2, only to see the Tyrants tied up at 6-6. But then after it was tied 6-6, the Freedom never led again, as the Tyrants led 8-6 at the side change, and then they started pulling away as Austin Matautia basically was just serving heat from that service line. And eventually the Freedom dropped the fifth set 15-9 as the Tyrants stayed undefeated, and they made me eat quite a bit of crow. But that's just the good thing about the Tyrants. Good teams make adjustments, or great teams make adjustments. And putting in Tanner Maxwell at setter, I don't know if that was the reason why they won, or I don't know if that was the key that they were winning. But honestly, Tanner Maxwell, he had the experience, and he did so great. But the big reason why they won was just the big and great performance of Ryan Mather. 23 kills. Jake Langlois also had 17 kills. Vekas Lewin and Austin Matautia each had 7 kills. Matautia had 2 aces and 2 blocks. For the New Jersey Freedom, Joe Norman led the way with 22 kills. Chris Vaughn and Jared Ray each had 13 kills. Unfortunately, it was just not enough, as this was the second straight match that the Freedom got reverse swept. In their previous match, which was against the Ramblers in event number 2, they got reverse swept. And that's got to be the worst feeling in the world, just getting reverse swept. Not once, but twice. So the fact that they got reverse swept, that's a big OUCH. So I hate to see that. I mean, obviously, Carlo Edra is a former guest on Set Point, and I have a lot of respect for him, but it's just so tough. But you also have to remember, the Freedom won a good portion of their 5-set matches last season. But last season is no longer relevant, and it's all about this season. So I think the tables have turned, and now the 5-set matches are going against the Freedom. So it's unfortunate for the Freedom, but they still had one more match to try to turn the tables. The last match of Day 2 of Event 3 was the Orange County Stunners taking on the Inland Empire Matadors. It was the Battle of California / the OG NVA teams. As the Stunners, they held nothing back, even though they hadn't played for heaven knows how long. As their first set, they just held nothing back. They didn't even have one player surpass 3 kills. They had only 8 kills as a team in set 1, but it was just enough as they took that first set 25-15. Nick, you know the Matadors struggled in that first set when the Stunners' kill leader was Nick West with 3 kills. Though Nick West is a really good player. Very talented middle blocker. And the Stunners only had 2 aces, but they were just serving tough. And then as for the second set, the Matadors kind of got together. They led 18-14 at one point. Eventually, it was 23-22 in favor of the Matadors. But then the Stunners turned the tide. One player who made a difference was Spencer Olivier, who had 7 kills. If you know him, he was an All-American for the Long Beach State men's volleyball team. He also just recently graduated, as Olivier just really made an impact. And head coach Matt Prosser told me that he held out Spencer Olivier just because he wanted to have him look and see what it's like to see what the NVA is like instead of just throwing him into the fire already in set 1. So I think that was a good little maneuver on Prosser's part. And Olivier had 7 kills in that opening set, which I think is pretty darn impressive if you ask me. And then Nick West had 6 kills following set 1, and then Damani Lenore had 5 kills. And I give credit to the Matadors. They really made the adjustments in set number 2, but unfortunately it just was not enough to take that second set. And then the third set, it was also just not enough, as the Matadors just could not keep up with the Stunners. And the crazy thing is that the Stunners didn't even have one player crack double digits in terms of kills, but they were just serving really well. Spencer Olivier had 3 aces, Tanner Woods had 2 aces, Corey Chavers, who was making his NVA season debut, he had 2 aces, Nick West had 2 aces. Matadors as a team only had 1 ace. That kind of goes to show you in terms of the service ace battle that was won and lost. Eventually, the Stunners won the third set 25-17 in the match, so it was a rough weekend for the Matadors. I'm sorry, Larry, but that's just how it is. And for the Matadors, they still are in contention for a playoff spot, but their seeding is looking pretty bleak. It's looking like they're going to be around the final spot. It's looking like they're going to be the last team in if they get in, but more on that later. Alright, so the last day of event number 3 was quite the doozy. So the first match was Florida Southern Exposure taking on New Jersey Freedom. First set, the Freedom came to play as they took that first set 25-20. Joe Norman was lighting it up as he had 6 kills, while Sam Jackman added 5 kills for the Exposure. I was quite impressed with the Freedom, as they sure as heck did not have a little bit of a 5-set loss hangover at the beginning. But then the second set, the Exposure woke up. They basically made sure they were not going to go down 0-2, because if they went down 0-2, it was practically GG. So, for the Exposure, they took the second set 25-23 as they knotted the match up at 1-1. Sam Jackman was up to 12 kills at that point, while no one on the Freedom had double digits, as they really slowed down Joe Norman in that second set. They slowed down the entire Freedom offense, as like I said, no one had double digits in terms of kills, as Norman only had 2 kills in that second set, which I think it's rather impressive. For the Exposure, they're not the best blocking team, as Evan McDonough was kind of the only guy that was blocking for them, but honestly, he was still performing well. Then the third set, the Freedom never trailed as they won that third set 25-16. They made a statement in that third set, and Norman doubled his kill total from set 2 all the way to set 3. He had 8 kills in set 2. That just doubled to 16. Jared Ray was also helping him out as he had 10 kills, or he eventually was up to 10 kills at that point. Sam Jackman was trying to basically do his thing, but he only was held to 1 kill. That was kind of crucial right there. Then the fourth set, this was very interesting. So, Freedom was up early on. It was looking like the Freedom were finally going to snap that 2-game losing skid. But then the Exposure, they took the lead I think it was 17-16, and then they eventually led 20-18. So then I'm starting to think, are we getting Cinco sets here to start day 3 of event 3? But then Freedom went up 23-22 off of a block from Joe Norman. But the Exposure scored the last 3 points. It was tied 23-23, and the Exposure, or the Freedom hit it wide, and then Evan McDonough had a service ace. That was a crucial ace by the Exposure, and then suddenly it was going Cinco sets. Normally I'm jinxing it when I tweet out, are we going Cinco sets? But this time it went Cinco sets. Then the fifth set, it was kind of like the Tyrants Freedom match in that fifth set. Both teams were tied 6-6, but then the Freedom went up 8-6 at the side change. They were up 10-7 at one point, and they eventually went up 13-10 and then 14-11, and suddenly it was looking like it was going to be... It looked like the Freedom were going to win, but then they missed a serve, so it's 14-12 Freedom. And then it's a hitting error from the Freedom. I hate to give out the name, but it was Joe Norman who had the hitting error. So suddenly it's 14-13, timeout Freedom. Then we get a major 40-second rally. For those that say men's volleyball does not have rallies, you're dead wrong, and you need to reevaluate yourself in terms of volleyball. But it was a 40-second rally, and then Freedom get called for a back row attacker violation. It's 14-14. And then a hitting error from the Freedom. It's now 15-14. And then it eventually took the Freedom 3 match points, but then Sam Jackman burst through the block, put down the kill, and then the Exposure snapped their 4-game losing streak, which dated all the way back to Event 1, as they posted a huge win. Exposure was led by Sam Jackman, 23 kills. Zach Meyer stepped up. He had that serving run when the Exposure were down 14-12. He had 15 kills. Evan McDonough, 9 kills, 4 blocks. He had that crucial ace to give the Exposure set number 4. It was just big time right there for the Exposure. Freedom were led by Joe Norman, who had 23 kills, Jared Ray, 16 kills, Tom Burrell, 10 kills, Chris Vaughn, 9 kills. Unfortunately, it was just not enough. Their third straight loss, and it was also in 5 sets, as the 5-set losses are now coming back to haunt the Freedom. The good news is for the Freedom is that they're still in a position to make the postseason, but they're going to need to solve that 5-set problem sooner rather than later. It's basically, I don't know who to compare them in terms of NCAA men's volleyball teams, but they have to solve the 5-set problem sooner rather than later. Otherwise, if they have to go 5 sets again, it might not be pretty come playoff time. So the next matchup we had was the Philadelphia Founders versus the Las Vegas Ramblers. So the first set was a surprise, as both teams were basically just tug-of-warring it out. Both teams were actually only led by 1 by the time the media timeout rolled around. And then the Founders were actually holding their own against the Ramblers, and they took the first set 25-23. But then after that, the Ramblers woke up, and they basically just came to play. And they eventually took the next 3 sets, 25-19, 25-14, and 25-15 in the match. Miguel Monterola, their head coach, told me that they got off to a slow start and they were missing serves, and they need to follow the game plan throughout the entire day. And he said they can't make any excuses because they're all professional players and whatnot. As the Ramblers were led by Jalen Penrose, who had 13 kills. Felix Chapman added 9 kills. Overall, for the Ramblers, it was just a great night for them. Kyler Presho made his NBA debut. He had 5 kills and 4 blocks. Not a bad debut for him. The Founders were led by Peter Namiotko, who had 11 kills. Colby Anderson had 7 kills. But the Founders were kind of outdone in the service ace department, even though that was like 4-1 in favor of the Ramblers. And they were outblocked 13-5. That was kind of a big problem right there as well. So then we go to the match of the week. And we were halfway through the NBA regular season. But we had the match of the week, San Diego Wild, Texas Tyrants. This was a wild matchup, to say the least. So the first set, Tyrants were down 16-15 in the first set. This match was as good as advertised. But then the Tyrants were getting it together. They started leading. Ryan Mather and Jake Langley were doing their thing. It was 24-22, and it looked like they won the match off of a block at the net. But then it was reviewed. Great challenge by Nick England, the head coach, that it was a net violation. Suddenly it was 24-23, but then Vekas Lewin blocked one of the Wild players at the net, and then the Tyrants took the first set 25-23. It was a big, intense first set. A lot of flair, a little bit of trash talking here and there. Then the second set, just like the first set, Wild were up 16-15 at the media timeout. But then the Tyrants were really stringing them together, and there wasn't in need of a tight nail-biter first set. Even though it was still a close set, the Tyrants took that second set 25-22, and they were up 2-0. I was very surprised that the Tyrants were up 2-0 on the Wild, just because the Wild had some of the better players. And this time, the Wild kind of shuffled their lineup. They used Will Campbell at setter. They had Josh Eisenberg at the libero. They did lose Matt Kinigi to a little bit of an ankle injury in that second set, but he eventually returned. So just a little bit of an unfortunate break right there, but he did return. So the third set, Wild were up 16-12, and it was looking like we were finally going to see the Wild basically break through and get a set off of the Tyrants. But the Tyrants were getting it together. They basically made the plays to possibly sweep them. And eventually the Tyrants just were putting pressure on them. And the problem for the Wild is that they were making unforced errors. They were either hitting the ball long or wide, or they were serving. They had service errors. Unfortunately for the Wild, they were also getting outdone in like certain categories, even though the Tyrants were kind of shooting themselves in the foot. But eventually the Tyrants took the third set 28-26 and the match. I was very surprised to see the Tyrants sweeping the Wild. I thought the Wild were at least going to take one set, but if you had the Tyrants winning in straight sets over the Wild, take a bow, as the Tyrants became the first team to clinch at least a share in their division. They haven't clinched the outright division or any playoff spot just yet, but they have clinched a share in their division. Don't mean to say this in a negative way, but it kind of doesn't help that they're in the division of the Untouchables and the Blaze, but it can't be helped in that regard. The Tyrants were led by Ryan Mather, who had 17 kills. Jake Langlois had 11 kills. Austin Matautia, 8 kills. As a team, the Tyrants had 9 blocks to the Wild's 4. Both teams had 3 aces. And even though the Tyrants missed 19 serves compared to the Wild's 10, they were just serving tough. Both teams had a lot of missed serves as they combined for 11 service errors, which was quite funny. If you're not a fan of service errors, I would not recommend seeing that second set. The Wild were led by Brandon Rattray, who had 14 kills. Joel Auerkamp had 10 kills. I thought he did a good job of stepping up. Lior Schiffer added 7 kills. Unfortunately for the Wild, it just wasn't enough, as they're now 1 game behind the Utah Stingers in the American Coastal Division. I want to say it's the Coastal Division and not the Central Division. Either way, they're 1 game behind the Stingers in their division, as, again, that will be a little bit of a breakdown in terms of standings a little bit later. As the last match of event number 3 was the Los Angeles Blaze taking on the Orange County Stars. The Battle of California and the battle of 2 OG NBA teams. Long story short, let's just say this match kind of made history for... I want to say it made history for being one of the shorter matches in terms of the NBA, as the Stunners swept the Blaze 25-14, 25-13, 25-14. The Blaze, like I said, they were missing a good amount of players. The Stunners, they had Spencer Olivier. He led the way with 9 kills. Tanner Woods had 8 kills. Shane Beamer did his thing in terms of the service line. Damani Lenore had 7 kills. They also got to debut Calvin Sandborn, another Long Beach State men's volleyball player who just recently graduated. Soon we're also going to see Grant Maroki. Just going to spoil it right there. Sorry, can't talk straight right there. Just going to spoil it right there. We're going to see Grant Maroki. So we're just going to put that out there right now. So the Stunners right there and then, they now have a 2-game lead in their division, in the National Coastal Division. So for them, they had themselves quite the successful event, though Matt Prosser, their head coach, is not concerned about division placements or the playoffs as of right now. They're looking forward to playing in the playoffs, but right now, the playoffs are not their biggest concern. Event 4 is their biggest concern, as they're looking forward to being at full strength and possibly talking about, or possibly seeing what their opponent is going to be like. But as for the LA Blaze, it just wasn't their night, as Dexter Campbell led the way with 8 kills. Andrew Dubé had 7 kills. I'm just going to say this right now for the Blaze. This is my bold prediction. I think the Blaze in Event 4 win a match. I'm already going to guarantee it. The Blaze are going to win a match in Event 4. I guarantee it. They have the Founders and they have the Pythons. Now, the Pythons match might be a little bit tougher just because they have to face the big, bad, and scary Jair Santiago. But I think they have a good shot at maybe winning at least one of those matches. It all depends on who's available. If they can get at least one of their top players available, or at least all of those players that did not basically were available in some of the past events, they could at least win one match. They have winnable matches. I am certain the Blaze will not go winless. I'm going to call it right now. The Blaze are not going winless in the NBA. And if they don't win a match in Event 4, they're at least beating the Untouchables. No offense to Chicago, but without Andrew Kohut, I just don't see I mean, obviously, the Untouchables are going to make the adjustments without Andrew Kohut, but I don't know if they can stack up to the Blaze. I mean, they have Joshua Blair, who is fantastic, and they look pretty good despite not having him, but I think the Blaze, even though they lost to the Untouchables the first match, they had the Untouchables on the run. They just needed to basically put it all together. So we'll see what happens in Event 5 and Event 4. But I am guaranteeing the Los Angeles Blaze winning a match, at least one match this year. And I'm going to call it right now. Blaze are winning a match in Event 4. Book it, everybody. Book it, clip it, and basically record it and do whatever you want with it, but I am guaranteeing a Los Angeles Blaze win in event number 4. So as for the NVA standings, the Tyrants, like I said, they are in first place in their division, and they are looking really good. And all they just need to do is win one more match, or the Untouchables and Blaze just need to lose one more, and then they are division champions outright, and then they clinch the automatic qualifier, which is which to me, again, it kind of doesn't help that the Untouchables lost one of their top players in Andrew Kohut, but that's basically why you have other players willing to step up. And then for the Stunners, they're actually 2 games ahead of the New Jersey Freedom in the National Coastal Division, as they're 5-1. Freedom are 3-3. The Stunners can clinch a share of their division title if they win, and they can clinch the outright division title if they win both games. And then the if the Freedom lose both their games. But for the Stunners, they have the Utah Stingers and the Las Vegas Ramblers. Both of those opponents are going to be really tough. And for the Ramblers, it's a rematch of last year's NVA championship. So, man, that's going to be a barn burner right there. And then as for the American Central Division, you have the Utah Stingers leading the San Diego Wild by 1 match. So it is the American Central, not the American Coastal. Well, that's kind of weird, but I digress. But for the Utah Stingers, they have the Texas Tyrants and the Orange County Stunners. Those are going to be 2 challenging matches right there, and man, that's going to be brutal right there. So the Utah Stingers have seen their success, but now it's kind of going to get a little bit tougher in terms of level of opponents. It's kind of like a video game where you've beaten some of the levels, but now it starts to get really tough. And then as for the Wild, losing that match to the Tyrants have kind of set them back, but as I kind of talked this over with Nick England's wife, she basically and I talked, and I said, look, as long as the Wild get into the big dance, this loss does not mean anything. And as long as you make the playoffs, you're golden. So the next time the Wild will be playing will be against the Inland Empire Matadors. So it'll be Nick England's team that he owns versus Larry B's team that he is a fan of. And then the Wild close out the event number 4 against the Chicago Untouchables. So basically the Wild are very close to clinching at least a playoff spot. And looking at the standings in terms of the Wild are in third place. If the playoffs started today, they would basically be in regardless. They would just be the 3 seed in terms of the playoffs, which it's not bad, especially since I'll be telling you all about the playoff format a little bit later. And then as for the American Coastal Division, the Ramblers are in first place at 5-1. They're inching very close to clinching the division at least. They have a 3-game lead ahead of the Exposure and the Matadors. I want to say if they win, they would move to 6-1, and then if the Ramblers win their next match, and then the Exposure, heaven forbid, and the Matadors lose their next match, they would be the division champs. Basically, the ball is in the Ramblers' court. They just have to basically play their cards right. If they don't, then it's going to take a while for them to win their division. But I'm 95% certain the Ramblers are not going to waste away an opportunity to clinch their division. They're currently first in the American Division standings, as the Ramblers also have the Stingers in the next event, which is going to be a barn burner right there. And like I said, they have the Ramblers, which, again, rematch of last year's NVA championship. And that 1 seed is still up for grabs in terms of the Ramblers, Stingers, and Wild. And what I like about the American standings, the American Conference standings, is that it's not just the Ramblers that are really good. It's the Stingers that's up there in terms of talent, and then the Wild is up there, and then so on and so forth. Heck, the Matadors and Exposure are basically fighting for that last playoff spot. And even the Founders, they still have a chance to clinch this playoff spot. So you can't count out anybody in the American Conference, or the American Conference. So all that matters is making the big dance. And you might also have to consider point system as well, as points kind of also matter as well. It's not just going to be head-to-head, but points may factor in as well. I'm not too certain on the point system, but it is what it is. Now, as for the playoff format will no longer be crossover, where the number 1 seed of the American Conference plays the number 4 seed of the National Conference. It's basically going to be like American sports in terms of playoffs. It's going to be the 1 seed from the American Conference takes on the 4 seed of the American Conference, and then the 2 seed of the American Conference takes on the 3 seed of the American Conference. And then eventually it's going to be the American Conference versus the National Conference, which, like I said, it's just like American sports. It's just like the NBA, the NFL, the MLS, the NHL, the MLB, the list goes on and on. Not the NWSL, though. They don't have the East and West, if you know what I mean. But, yeah, that's basically what it is right there. So that's the format of the NVA, and I kind of like it just because it's not just going to be one conference being better than the other, even though I think the American Conference is drastically improved. And the National Conference isn't all that bad either. I mean, the Freedom obviously had a rough weekend in terms of their losses. They lost 2 5-setters, and they even had a chance. They had multiple chances to put away the Exposure in that match, especially in that 5th set. But unfortunately, they just could not do it. But I still think the Freedom are going to get in. The Freedom are definitely going to get in. The only way the Freedom don't get in is if they collapse in their last few games, which I highly doubt that. Like, I'm sure they'll have Joe Norman and Jared Ray, Chris Vaughn, Matt Seifert, John Cunningham, Derek Sullivan, and all those guys available for the next 2 events. Like, the thing about the Freedom is that when they have their entire team or a good portion of their team, they're practically unbeatable. Now, I'm not saying they weren't at full strength this weekend. I'm pretty sure they had a good portion of their roster. But for them, I think they're going to have to solve this 5-set crisis sooner rather than later. Otherwise, it's going to get pretty rough come playoff time. Alright, so that is that for the NVA and event number 3 in its entirety. We are going to take ourselves a quick little commercial break. When we come back, we'll have some schedule breakdowns in terms of the NCAA, in terms of women's volleyball. Then we'll recap the US U21's women's volleyball team winning gold at the Pan American Cup. And then we'll have some high school boys volleyball to discuss in terms of Avery Drost's departure from Mira Costa, and in terms of the Max Preps and USA Today rankings. So keep it locked here. You are listening to Set Point here on iSports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
Hey sports fans, do you like wine? Well, we've got the show for you. This is Let's Wine About Sports, a show where we talk about wine and sports simultaneously. From the classic Cabernet Sauvignon all the way down to the grapes that you've never even heard of before. Oh yeah, we cover it all. And we'll talk about a little bit of sports as well. Football, hockey, collegiate, women's sports, it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about it all, and we're going to whine about it all. So join me Monday at 8 p.m. on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Hello, ladies and sinners. Hello, sports fans around the world. Hello, IE Sports family. This is Cale Henderson, the host of IE Vegas, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio. If you folks are interested in sports in the Vegas area, if you're wanting to have a blast for 1 hour, every Tuesday night from 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, this is a show built for the Vegas sports fans, where we feature the Las Vegas Raiders, the Las Vegas Golden Knights, the Las Vegas Aces, and the University of Las Vegas, Nevada Rebels. Hopefully, fingers crossed, MLB team coming soon. Either way, if you folks are looking to have a blast for 1 hour each and every week, tune in Tuesday, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you folks are interested in Vegas sports news, go to our Twitter, at SinCities_IESR, and you can speak with me, the host, Cale Henderson, at Cale_Henderson on Twitter. At any time, be happy to reply. Always want to reach out to our fans. Again, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
That is right, everybody. Definitely check out all of our amazing shows, such as Let's Wine About DMV Sports and Sin City Sports with Cale Henderson. That show will be coming on a little bit later on at 7 p.m. Pacific Time. But for right now, welcome back to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Let's get on into the second half of our show. So, while the NBA was going on this past weekend, we also had the U.S. U21 women's volleyball team playing in the Pan American Cup, as this past week they actually were partaking in the Pan American Cup tournament, as they basically played in Nogales, Mexico, which was the site of the whole tournament, and in their first match, they defeated Guatemala on Wednesday, 25-8, 25-13, 25-14. Then, the day after, on last Thursday, they defeated Dominican Republic 25-16, 25-20, and 25-14. Then, on Friday, they defeated Costa Rica 25-11, 25-8, and 25-9. Then they didn't get a bye, but they got put into the semifinals. I guess there is no bye, as they had enough teams to get put into the semifinals, as they got to face Cuba. They beat Cuba 25-15, 25-13, and 25-20. Then was the gold medal match. It was against the host team, Mexico, and there was some speculation that there could have been a possible upset. No, there wasn't. The U.S. was able to win that match in straight sets, 25-13, 25-16, and 25-21, winning the gold medal in the U.S. U21 Pan American Cup in Nogales, Mexico, as they went 5-0, and they didn't even drop a set, kind of like the U17 team and the U19 boys team, which was darn right impressive. So, more gold for the U.S. in terms of its youth teams in terms of the Pan American Cup. So, yeah, the U.S. is in good hands in terms of the future. I really think that the U.S. has a lot of young, bright athletes. And I gotta give credit to Dan Fisher. They really had his team prepared. The MVP, or the most outstanding player of the tournament, was Chloe Chicoine. I want to say she's on Purdue. So yeah, she is on Purdue. I was going to say it was somewhere in terms of Big Ten land, but it is Purdue. She was named the tournament MVP, and she was the first best outside hitter. Nora Sis of Creighton, she was the second best outside hitter. Rachel Fairbanks took best setter. Gabrielle Essex earned first best middle blocker, and Lauren Briseño earned best receiver. So Gabrielle Essex is from the University of Florida, and then Briseño is from, I want to say she's from Baylor, if I'm not mistaken, but either way, Briseño, yeah, Briseño is from Baylor, so yeah, I'm not trying to assume or anything, but I didn't hear of the other one, but Briseño is indeed from Florida. She was the libero, but the entire roster is on here via the USA Volleyball. Lauren Briseño, libero from Baylor. Chloe Chicoine, outside hitter from Purdue. Rachel Fairbanks, setter from Pitt. McKenna Wercher, I'm probably butchering that. I don't think a whole lot of people get that right, but I digress. McKenna Wercher, outside hitter from Minnesota. Eva Hudson, outside hitter from Purdue. Nora Sis, outside hitter from Creighton. Alexis Stuckey, setter from Florida. Gabrielle Essex, middle blocker from Florida. Devin Kahahawai, I probably butchered that one too. Texas. Ali Sizek, opposite from Baylor. Bree Kelly, middle blocker, who is in the transfer portal. I like how it says undecided. That's very awkward, but I guess that's kind of the correct term to use, undecided. And then Mariana Singletary, middle blocker from Texas. And then the head coach is Dan Fisher, the head coach of Pitt. And then the assistant coaches were Josh Walker and Jessica Aschenbrenner. Team leader is Jeffrey Wanderer. And then athletic trainer Rebecca Duran. And then performance analyst is AJ Ruttenberg. So that is basically your US U21 women's team that won gold in Mexico, over Mexico. So congratulations to them on defending their title in the NORCECA Pan American Cup, and that's pretty darn good, impressive. And the fact that they won gold in the US U17 girls tournament and the US, I think it was like the U19 or U17 boys tournament, is very impressive as well. So, like I said, the US boys and girls national team is in good hands in terms of its future. So, I really am quite impressed with how the US has a good developmental national team. So, there's that right there, and I am very excited to see what the US has in store for us in terms of the future. So, good job to the U.S. national team, or in terms of the U21 team. All right, so that is that for the U.S. or Team USA volleyball news right there. So let's jump on over to some NCAA women's volleyball news. As last week we had the schedule releases from the University of Tennessee and the University of Florida. We'll start off with Tennessee, as their exhibition match will be against the University of Lipscomb, which will be on August 18th. Their season opener will be in the Tennessee Classic, starting off against Texas State. And then the day after, they have Marist. And then following that, they have UT Martin. And then on August 31st, they head down to beautiful San Diego, California for the San Diego tournament to take on San Diego. And then after that, they face Boston College. Kind of an interesting matchup. They face San Diego when they lose all of those players, even though they got Annie Evans. But San Diego's going to probably be in a major rebuild mode. But time will tell to see if they'll be up there in terms of talent. They probably will, especially with BYU leaving the conference. And then on Saturday, Sunday, September 3rd, Tennessee will be hitting the road to Madison, Wisconsin to take on Wisconsin. Yikes. So they only get 1 day of travel and rest, and then they got to go to Wisconsin after they play in the San Diego tournament. Whew. Interesting. And then on September 8th, Tennessee will be heading down to the Windy City to take on Loyola Chicago. And then on September 10th, they'll be heading down to Milwaukee, back to Wisconsin, to play Marquette. So they've got kind of a Midwest road trip after they play in San Diego. And then after that, they welcome Chicago State to Knoxville. And then they welcome Evansville to close out their non-conference slate. It's probably like a little bit of a mini Tennessee tournament before they open up SEC play, as that will be on September 20th, which is a Wednesday, as they play Missouri. And then on September 24th, they hit the road to Lexington, Kentucky to take on Kentucky in what is the first of 2 rivalry matches against the Wildcats. And if you're a Tennessee fan, it's a good time to be alive. Though Kentucky's kind of gotten the better of the Vols in years past, but we'll see. Then on September 29th, Tennessee plays in Starkville against Mississippi State. Then October 1st, which is a Sunday, Tennessee hits the road to Oxford to take on Ole Miss. Then October 4th, Tennessee heads to Tuscaloosa, Alabama to take on Alabama. Then on October 8th, Tennessee welcomes LSU to its humble abode. So it's quite a long road trip after they welcome Missouri. It's a 4-game road trip after that. Thankfully, they do get time to come back, but that's brutal right there. Fortunately, they will get a little bit of a homestand. They get a 4-game homestand starting with LSU. Then on October 13th, which is a Friday, they welcome Auburn, a team that made it to the round of 32 by upsetting Creighton and nearly pulling off the win over Houston. Then on October 15th, Tennessee will be hosting Kentucky, which, man, I can already hear the Tennessee fans and their loud cheering against Kentucky. Then on October 20th, Tennessee will host Arkansas, another quality opponent right there. And then on October 25th, a Wednesday, Tennessee will be hitting the road to Columbia to take on Missouri. Then on October 29th, Tennessee will be hosting Texas A&M. Then on November 3rd, a Friday, Tennessee will be hitting the road to Gainesville to take on Florida. Then the week after, they will be hosting Georgia. And then 2 days after, they will be hosting Ole Miss. Then on November 17th, Tennessee will be hitting the road to the Bayou, or Baton Rouge, to take on LSU. And then 2 days after, they will be heading down to College Station to take on Texas A&M. And then on November 22nd, a Wednesday, Tennessee will be hosting Mississippi State. And then closing out the regular season, Tennessee will be hitting the road to Columbia to take on South Carolina. So Tennessee's got a good number of interesting matches. They got Texas State, which is perennially good. Normally, they make the NCAA tournament, but last year was kind of a rough year. But I will just say that I think Texas State should be better. I think they were one of the first 3 out in terms of missing the NCAA tournament. And then Tennessee's got San Diego, which made the Final Four. Boston College, which won the women's volleyball national tournament. And then they've got Wisconsin, which made the Elite Eight. Loyola of Chicago, which made the NCAA tournament. They got Marquette, which made it to the Sweet 16. And then that's a good little non-conference slate. So my thing for Tennessee is, what are they going to look like in the post-Natalie Hayward era? They've got some good players. They've got Erica Lovett, who returns. They got Janasia Moore, who they signed from Ohio State. They've got Morgan Fingal, who returns for her 5th year. They've got good players. I really think their middles are what really wows me. They've got a 6'5", 6'6" middle, one hails from Poland, the 6'6" middle, Claudia Paulik, and then the other one is Emily Beaker, a 6'5" redshirt sophomore middle blocker. She is definitely going to make an impact. They've got Jasmine Brooks, who's 6'2", going to be playing the outside hitter position. So this is going to be a work in progress. But if Tennessee plays their cards right, I think the Lady Vols can, hence the word can, possibly make some noise in the SEC. Now, the top two, in my opinion, in terms of the SEC are Kentucky and Florida, which is perfect segue to go into Florida's schedule. But I think for Tennessee, they still are a work in progress, and they have to know who is going to be the setter for them following Natalie Hayward's departure. But we'll see what happens. Jumping over to Florida's schedule, so right off the bat, they open up the Road to Tampa Bay Invitational, which, best tournament name ever. So that's going to be taking place at University of South Florida, by the way. So the Road to Tampa Bay Invitational will be Florida versus Penn State. Match of the day right there. Penn State versus Florida. You can't ask for a better matchup right there. That is the best matchup ever. In terms of that day, at least. Sorry. And then after that, Florida plays the host South Florida, which, in case you're all wondering, the Road to Tampa Bay Invitational, the NCAA tournament is being played in Tampa Bay. So that's kind of your little bit of a fun fact right there. Then on Tuesday, August 29th, Florida heads down to Stanford to take on Stanford. Then September 3rd, which is a Sunday, Florida hosts Minnesota. Then the Gator Invitational, or Gators Invitational. Why not call it Gator Invitational? That's weird. Anyway, the Gators Invitational, Florida hosts Sacramento State on September 7th, a Thursday. Then they host Clemson on September 8th, a Friday. And then they host Winthrop on September 9th, a Saturday. Then on September 12th, a Tuesday, Florida heads down to Tallahassee to take on Florida State, which it's always a great rivalry when Florida State and Florida face one another. And Mike Pat was just in the chat room. He said, have a great show. I don't know if he's still listening, but he's a big Florida State guy. And it's only a matter of time before he starts asking the question, has Florida State won it all yet? But we'll see. Then on September 17th, a Sunday, Florida will be hosting Wisconsin in Gainesville, a.k.a. the Exatech Arena. I just call it the Swamp, but whatever. Anyway, that's actually the perfect way to end non-conference play, as September 22nd, they actually open up SEC play at Auburn. Now, I think that's a very good way to open up SEC play, and that's actually the perfect test for Auburn, considering, well, Auburn made it to the round of 32 by upsetting Creighton. I think it's time for Auburn to really prove themselves in SEC play. We'll see. Then on September 24th, Florida hosts Georgia. Then on September 27th, a Wednesday, Florida will host Texas A&M. October 1st, a Sunday, Florida will be heading down to Columbia to take on South Carolina. That could be a sneaky good matchup right there, just because South Carolina does have its history of pulling off upsets against the Gators, but we'll see. October 6th, Florida hosts Auburn, which is a Friday. Then on October 8th, Florida hosts Alabama. Then on October 13th, which is a Friday, like I mentioned earlier, Florida will hit the road to Starkville to take on Mississippi State. Then the week after, they will be hitting the road again to College Station to take on Texas A&M. Then October 25th, a Wednesday, Florida will be hitting the road to Oxford, Mississippi to take on Ole Miss. Then on October 29th, a Sunday, Florida will be hosting Arkansas. Then November 3rd, like I mentioned, Florida will be hosting Tennessee. Then November 5th, a Sunday, Florida will be hosting Kentucky. November 10th, a Friday, Florida will be hosting LSU. Then November 12th, a Sunday, Florida will be hitting the road to Tuscaloosa to take on Alabama. November 17th, a Friday, Florida will be hitting the road to Columbia to take on Missouri. November 19th, a Sunday, Florida will be hitting the road to Fayetteville to take on Arkansas. Then on November 22nd, a Wednesday, Florida will be hosting South Carolina, which could be a make or break game right there. And then this is the big game right here. And this could be the deciding factor of who could win the SEC or who could lose the SEC automatic qualifier. November 25th, a Saturday, Florida hits the road to Lexington to play Kentucky. And what better way to end the regular season with that matchup? That could probably be the matchup of the day right there. So we'll see what happens with Kentucky and Florida. But for the time being, I think Florida's got themselves a pretty solid schedule right then and there as well. As they've got Penn State right off the bat. Penn State, Stanford, and Minnesota. 3 really good teams right there right off the bat. All of which made the Sweet 16. And Wisconsin also made the Sweet 16 as well. Florida State, obviously, they're a perennial NCAA team, and they're pretty solid as well, even though I kind of expected better from them in the NCAA tournament. But we'll see what happens with the Noles. But overall, I think the Gators should be good. Now, looking at the roster, they've got some good key pieces. Obviously, Bree Kelly, losing them is going to be tough. But having AC Fitzpatrick is good, and having Sophia Victoria is definitely good as well. Alexis Stuckey returns for her sophomore season. And then getting Anna Dixon from Missouri is definitely huge as well. They still have Ellie McKissock, the libero. Then Kennedy Martin is still there. Well, Kennedy Martin is returning for her sophomore year. They have a bunch of other players as well. I think the list goes on, and this is just their spring roster. They haven't even introduced their freshmen yet. So overall, I think Florida should be fine. Do I think they're going to be true contenders? That still remains to be seen. But for the time being, I think Florida is going to be up there in terms of at least top 3 in terms of the SEC. I think they are going to possibly challenge Kentucky for the crown. I can't really fully predict if Kentucky is going to win the crown. I can't really guarantee Kentucky winning the crown, but Kentucky at the time being looks like an early favorite. But do not count out the Gators. Do not count out Tennessee. Do not count out anyone else in that SEC. I think the SEC is looking pretty darn good. And also, Arkansas is pretty solid as well, so don't sleep on those Razorbacks. So that's that for some NCAA women's volleyball. If I'm doing my math correctly, we have 86 days left until the first day of the 2023 NCAA women's volleyball season, which should be fun times, and I can't wait to see the start of that NCAA cycle. So now let's jump on into some high school volleyball news. So this was actually posted on Avery Drost's Instagram yesterday, as he posted on his Instagram yesterday, and I didn't even know about this until today, about like maybe an hour or so before I went live with Set Point. Avery Drost has stepped down from his position as boys volleyball coach at Mira Costa High School. He posted on his Instagram account, "Thank you, Costa, for everything. I'll be forever grateful for this time and the memories we have. Champs for life and in life." And he also has a little bit of a passage, which it comes from. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name because I don't want to butcher it. Just because, in case I do mispronounce it, I don't want to anyone yelling at me. But Avery Drost has stepped down from his head coaching position at Mira Costa High School. So I know Avery Drost really well, and the dude leads a very busy lifestyle. The dude is an AVP player. Let's start off with that. Sometimes he's unable to coach just because he's playing in tournaments. Sometimes the dude, that's just the gist of it. And then the dude has 3 kids. His wife just recently gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and they're doing really well. Or actually, it's a baby boy. I'm sorry. It's a baby boy. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know Or was it a baby girl? I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know the Drost family personally, but I just know that they have 3 kids, Jane, Blake, and Micah. Either way, they have 3 kids, and those kids are eventually growing up, and Allie, the wife, just can't do it all. If I recall correctly, I think Allie is also part of the healthcare force. Don't quote me on that, but either way, honestly, for Avery, I understand his stance on stepping down. He's leading a busy lifestyle, and heck knows if he's also coaching club. I would not be surprised if he's not coaching if he's still coaching at Manhattan Beach Boys Volleyball Club. And the dude is just so busy, and obviously his kids are definitely growing up because, well, his kids, they're young for the time being, but he wants to be there to spend time with his kids, even when he has like AVP tournaments and whatnot. So I understand his reasoning for. Now, this isn't confirmed. Now, obviously, he hasn't confirmed the true reasoning, but I'm 99% certain this is the reason why Avery Drost stepped down as head coach of Mira Costa Boys Volleyball. And being a head coach is so much tough work. I can't speak on behalf of being a head coach, but I know a lot of my friends who are head coaches. It's just a lot of work, and coaching club just adds to that dish full of, or that laundry list full of chores and whatnot, and he just doesn't have enough time to be with the kids and to be with the wife, so it's a tough decision. And Mira Costa is a heralded boys volleyball team in not just Southern California, but in the world. They've won 7 CIF Southern Section championships, and they've won probably more. It's probably just not recorded in the CIF Southern Section championship books, but either way, they're a very storied program in terms of high school boys volleyball, and it's good. Avery Drost did bring them, I wouldn't say bring them back to relevancy, but he's put them back on the map. I'll just say it like that, and it's going to be a major void in terms of him leaving the program or him departing from the program. He'll obviously be there in terms of like supporting the program just because he's a former Mira Costa boys volleyball player, but in terms of being a head coach, there's a major void that needs to be filled. I highly doubt Michael Cook is going to go back to being the head coach just because the dude retired from coaching following 2008 when he won a CIF championship. Now, who are possible coaching candidates that could be the head coach of Mira Costa? Well, that's an easy one. Greg Snyder, his top assistant coach. And Greg Snyder was kind of the head assistant coach back in 2021. I'm sorry, not 2021, 2022, when Avery Drost had to go to Austin, Texas for an AVP tournament, and Mira Costa made the CIF Southern Section semifinals, which sadly saw them losing in 3. But I think Greg Snyder is the perfect candidate to take over as head coach of Mira Costa's boys volleyball team. I would not be surprised if Greg Snyder was head coach, and he knows the ins and outs of being a head coach, and he's taken over for Avery when Avery has been unable to be a head coach or be there as head coach. So I think Greg Snyder is my best bet to pick as head coach. Now, obviously, there are other candidates that could apply for the position, but if you want to hire an in-house hire and you don't want to go far, I would totally put money on picking Greg Snyder. But that's just my opinion. And if you want to see the impact of what Avery Drost has done for Mira Costa Boys Volleyball, he helped lead the Mustangs to a 2021 CIF, Southern Section, and SoCal Regional Division I Championship. I was there for the Southern Section Division I Championship. The reason why that championship was so special was because it had been 9 years since the Mustangs last won a Southern Section championship. Their last championship prior to 2021's championship came in 2012. That is a long time coming, and for Costa fans who have the reputation of being a really storied program, it kind of hurts. But for them, they were able to break the curse, and they were able to defeat Newport Harbor quite handily, especially in that first and third set. The second set, obviously, they dropped in a close fashion, and in the fourth set, Newport Harbor made it a little bit respectable for the most part, even though they never really led. But honestly, Mira Costa winning that championship, I think, kind of put them back on the map. And I really want to say, I would go as far as to say, if they don't win that championship that year, I think maybe Avery stays. But Avery is obviously going to pick his family over coaching. He's going to pick his family and the AVP more than he's going to pick coaching. Now, I'm not sure what it's going to mean in terms of coaching club, but I'm fairly certain he's going to be spending more time with his family and spending more time with the AVP more so than coaching. But time will tell. All I can confirm is that he is no longer the head coach at Mira Costa in terms of boys volleyball, and I'm fairly certain the school is going to be doing all that it can to do whatever it takes to fill the void as the head coach. But in terms of a personal note of Avery Drost, I will miss him. I think he is a fantastic head coach. I think he is a very respectable guy. I really like his demeanor off the court. I think he's a guy who I personally would like to have on the show. And who knows, maybe I'll get him on for the 200th episode. As long as there's no AVP tournament, but we'll see what happens. But overall, for Avery Drost, I want to give a set point salute to him and his future endeavors, and I wish him nothing but the best going forward. And if you've met Avery Drost, he's just a kind-hearted guy, and he is a fiery and passionate guy in terms of playing volleyball on the beach, but I really think he's just a down-to-earth guy. So I wish him the best going forward, and good luck with everything, Avery Drost. You're going to crush it. Can't wait to see you when it comes to another AVP tournament. So there's that. All right, so that is that for the Avery Drost news. So before we head on out of here, we have to go over the high school boys volleyball rankings. So where we left off, I predicted that probably Clovis East was going to be the new number one in terms of the USA Today / AVCA boys volleyball Super 25 rankings. That is actually not correct. So the Super 25 rankings came out last week, and it was actually Loyola High School as the new number one, or back at number one, because they were actually number one before they lost to Corona Del Mar in the CIF Southern Section semifinal. So Loyola is back at number one with that 29-2 record, which they finished with. Newport Harbor is bumped down to number two, as they're going to be finishing at number two. They finished 36-3. Clovis East, which I thought was going to be the new number one, they're number three. They finished 41-3. They won their Northern California CIF Northern California Regional Championship, and then the list goes onward down. I guess I'll also mention that Mira Costa, which was Avery Drost's team that he coached, they are number 10 in the Team not Team USA, the USA Today / AVCA Super 25 rankings. They actually went down a couple spots because they lost to Cathedral Catholic, which was mathematically an upset in terms of those rankings, but in terms of CIF SoCal Regional CIF SoCal Regional upsets, it was not an upset, just because Cathedral Catholic was actually seated above Mira Costa. But yeah, what it is what it is. So Loyola is the new number one in terms of the AVCA / USA Today Super 25. Now, as for the Max Preps rankings, yesterday the Max Preps rankings came out with a new top 25, and Newport Harbor is still the new number one, or they're still number one, as that was the case last week, despite losing to Loyola. As Loyola is number two, Newport Harbor is still number one, Clovis East is number three, and then so on and so forth. So I don't know what system Max Preps is using versus what system USA Today / AVCA is using, but heaven knows who's going to be the national champion. Like, do we give it to Newport Harbor that won the Southern Section Championship and that won Best of the West, but lost to Loyola twice and never beat them this season? Or do we give it to Loyola, which went 2-0 against Newport Harbor, won the CIF SoCal Regional Championship, lost in the CIF Southern Section semifinals, and then they just won one little mini tournament thingy? I don't know. Best of the West is a big deal, though, because there are lots of teams coming from a good portion of the world. Like, there are teams from Hawaii and from Arizona and maybe even from up east that come to partake in the Best of the West tournament. So we'll see what happens on who is going to be crowned the national champion in terms of high school boys volleyball. Maybe we'll have Newport Harbor and Loyola play one more match, maybe as an exhibition match, just to see who will be the national champion, which will not happen. It's not going to happen. High school volleyball is over with for the time being, especially in California, until next year. But for the time being, that is going to do it for a little bit of high school volleyball discussion. I probably won't be discussing any more high school volleyball for the time being, unless I get an official word on who is the national champion of who that's going to be between Loyola and Newport Harbor. I think they're both deserving of it. I think we'll just call them co-national champions. But I digress. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. It is that time to drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you everyone for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate everybody tuning in. If you listen live, I appreciate you. If you listen at work, I appreciate you. If you listen 3 hours in the morning, I appreciate you. If you listen at any time, any place, anywhere, I appreciate you. Shout out to the chat room, Larry B, Marcus Goes Great, Mike, Pat, Gail Anderson, and David Seacrest for popping into the chat room. I appreciate you. It really means a lot. I don't know what we're going to do in terms of volleyball content next week. I'll try to figure something out. It might be a shorter show just because there's not too much volleyball going on, but I do know that there's going to be an AVP tournament happening the week after, so there's going to be an AVP review, so we'll see what happens for next week. But until then, for everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing out. You have yourself a great rest of the evening. Enjoy the rest of the volleyball action if there is any. I will see you all probably Saturday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. But Saturday at best, it's my prediction. But we'll see what happens. Time will tell, as one of my friends once said. But until then, have yourself a great rest of the week. Enjoy the volleyball action. And definitely check out all my stuff on the NBA website. Day 3 recap will be going up there momentarily. Peace!